Welcome back to the channel, Bridging the Gap Student to Engineer, where STEM professionals provide advice to students. Today we're going to do a little bit of a different comparison. This is based on a request that came in. So we're going to be looking at Purdue University Business undergrad versus Indiana Business undergrad. So let's get started. All right, so we're going to be comparing the two schools, specifically business. This is using the same method that we've looked at STEM and specifically engineering at Purdue and many other schools. So let me know if you have any other suggestions for other schools, specifically these comparisons I can also do. Let me know. All right, so this process is part of what we talked about in the school selection video, which I'll provide a link to at the top of the screen. Again, this process is typically when you're in the final research and visit again stage, where you've gotten down to a few schools after you've received your acceptance, where you're really digging into the details and making those final decisions about where to go, where to commit and attend. So to go back to also the video about selecting a school, we talked about a lot of different considerations. Right now, we're going to be focusing on the career outcomes section of that. Again, employers, and grad schools should be your focus on looking at career outcomes. We're going to start with the Purdue Next Step Survey data dashboard. This is the same dashboard we used when we looked at their engineering student outcomes. The school provides it all in one place, and it just relies on us to do those filters. A few things about this next step, it's a lot of what the schools are calling it now. This is your first step or your next step after you finish your degree. It is a survey, so it relies on replies from students. So for those who don't reply, their data is just not in here. And then there's a dashboard, so that's really implying that we're able to go see a lot of data. So what we're going to do is we're going to filter for business, because that's what we're looking at. In this comparison, you'll see that Indiana University has the 2023 data and Purdue does not have that yet. But I am going to just talk about their latest year and then just leave the other years up there so you can see a comparison and see how the trends are. In this case, you can see that we've got a positive upward trend where a higher percent of Purdue business graduates are having positive outcomes as defined as either employed or continuing their education. And in some cases, you could include other in that positive outcomes. Either way, aside from the COVID year, the seeking employment, seeking education, what we'd consider negative outcomes are getting smaller. So that's really good. If you do dig into these numbers, which you can scroll over, you can see the actual numbers. They show that on the dashboard. If you just look at this, in this case, for 2022 business grads from Purdue, within 6 months of employment, out of the 485 students that responded to the survey, 1.4% or 7 students were still looking for employment. That is a really good number and pretty common amongst the different Purdue data that we've looked at. So let's go over to the salaries. Again, filtering for business. And then what we can see when we hover over this is that we've got minimum, maximum, 50th percentile, 25th percentile. When you were looking at getting into schools, a lot of the data about like the range for SAT scores and those kind of things is typically the 25th percentile to the 75th percentile. That's the middle 50% of the students. And that's a really good gauge for a lot of these things. So in this case, 50% of the graduates who got a job within 6 months of graduation were making somewhere between $56,000 and $70,000. So a pretty good number that we'll compare when we get over to Indiana. Okay, and then employment locations. This is an interesting one that I will spend some time doing a little bit more of a deep dive at the end of the video, so make sure you stick around or at least fast forward to that part. There is a significant difference between the two schools. I want to note here that that of the students that graduated again in 2022, it looks like the vast majority of them stayed in Indiana. There's a pretty big chunk that goes to Illinois. And then after that, we're looking at like Texas and California as the two major hitters. There are a lot of states that have fewer students, but for the most part, those grads are staying either in Indiana, Illinois, or going to large states like Texas and California. What you'll notice is that there's not very many in New York and not very many in Florida, both states that are pretty populous and often attract a lot of graduates. So we'll talk about that when we get to the end and compare this to the Indiana data. Okay, we're going to skip the grad school because we don't tend to focus too much on that. But I do want to talk about the industries. This is important when you're looking at what field to go into. So you'll see that the vast majority, huge, 4 times as many Purdue grads in business go into finance, insurance, and consulting. That is pretty common for a lot of business grads, but it is pretty significant, the drop off. But there are a lot of other industries that do hire these grads, so it's definitely worth a look if you're interested in doing something besides being a consultant or in finance or those major things that attract a lot of graduates. One thing I do want to note is airline, aviation, and aerospace. This is huge for Purdue engineering, but if you want to get into some companies like that, but without an engineering degree for whatever reason, business can be a way to get into them. And you can see that in some of these different industries that are listed here. So let's go to the top 25 employers. Again, filtering for business because that's what Purdue is asking us to do. Interesting mix here. So this NTT Data Services, they're actually an IT services employer. You will see some of the large consulting firms in here, PwC, those types of things. But if you look at this list, you will see a pretty diverse set of industries that these graduates go to. PepsiCo, hopefully you've heard of that. Food and beverage industry, Charles Schwab, so some investment. Eli Lilly is very big at Purdue in all majors or a wide variety of majors in pharmaceuticals. So looking through here, you can see it's not just a lot of the large consulting firms. It's a variety of industries, a variety of employers are coming to Purdue to get their new employees and their new grads. And if you like chocolate, you might notice the Hershey company down here. All right, so I'm going to stop there with the data analysis for Purdue, and what I'm going to do is flip over to IU. At IU, they have a different page for each of their schools. So this is the Kelley School of Business, and they have an outcomes page. You will see lots of differences in the graphics on this and how it's presented. Not as much information maybe as Purdue, but definitely more colors if that's what you're looking for. So again, back to the class of 2018 all the way up to the class of 2023. So we will we'll just go to 2023. If you do filter through here, you can see that they're pretty consistent in their outcomes. Again, needing to look at different majors if you want. We're going to keep this open because there are a lot of different options and we're looking at business as a whole. I will say that for business analytics in particular, just as an example, you can look at this and see that the outcomes are pretty similar to the school as a whole. I think the starting salary is a little bit higher and this top employers changes. Unlike Purdue, we don't get a bar chart so you can see how many graduates go in each of these places, but this list of top employers is dynamic with the filtering on the top, and so this is accurate for business analytics. But as we go through everything, I'm going to pick all majors and programs within the Kelley School of Business for undergraduates. So again, we have, similar to Purdue, we've got within 6 months of graduation, IU business grads are pretty successful. So we've got employed full-time 84%, continuing education 13. Now, when we go to seeking employment, 1.5%, that's pretty much on par with what we saw at Purdue. Not seeking, I would say, is similar to what Purdue had for other. And then they've got some breakdown in here about how many grads go to the military service or volunteer service. So that is available in here. Again, a very small percent of graduates go to that. But as far as success rate, just in getting a job or getting into grad school, pretty much very similar to what we saw at Purdue. But what we see in top employers is interesting, and that is the top ones are all of the big accounting firms, consulting firms. EY used to be called Ernst & Young, PwC, so PricewaterhouseCoopers, Deloitte, KPMG, those big ones, where you would think of a lot of business grads going to and having a concentration of business type people, a lot of there. But when you start looking at for different industries, I'm not really seeing a whole lot of them. Target is something that's, retail, and there are some others. There are some other names in here that are definitely not a top consulting firm, but the variety of types of employers is not quite there. Having said that, if you do want to go into consulting, then this may be a really good option for you. On the other hand, if you were interested in getting into construction or chocolate making, you don't see those companies here. That doesn't mean you couldn't do it. It just means it's less likely those companies are recruiting at IU, less likely that you will have friends that are going to these places, less likely to have an easy access to an internship, those types of things. Nothing is impossible and nothing is super hard, but when you're in school, sometimes it's really nice to have those companies come to you rather than you having to fly all over to try to interview and those types of things. Okay, now when we go to starting salary, you'll see the mean and the median. Again, this is something that we talked about when we were at Purdue. The median is a better indication. In this case, probably what happened is a few people are making significantly more than others, and so the mean has raised up. But having said that, both of these numbers are higher than Purdue. I will click over there real quick, just so we can take a comparison. But if we're looking at 64,000 as the average or the mean versus 76 is the mean, that's a pretty significant difference. Now IU gives you salary statistics, and these I will click over to really quickly. They have information by major. So if you are considering whether or not to, go into accounting versus business economics, business analytics is part of their supply chain and operations management group. So that's where this salary falls. They do give you that information. They also give it to you by geographic location. And in a minute, I think you will see why it is that the mean is maybe a little bit bigger. I'll just give it away now. How about that? So IU has a lot of grads that go to New York and Purdue doesn't. So when you look at the starting salary and really the required salary you need to be able to live in these places, they are higher when you get to the larger cities. So that may have something to do with it. there's not really enough data to make an absolute call, but definitely something to consider. Um, Something that IU also gives you is intern pay rates, and these are really good. To have an hourly wage for an intern at $32 is significantly higher than many other majors. So definitely something to consider. Also looking at the range, I wouldn't expect to be working in a small city somewhere making $69 an hour. I'm probably going to be in New York City or somewhere major where the cost of living is pretty extensive. So if you dig into these, you can definitely find out more information. Again, we're trying to dig into that a little bit, but stay at a high level for comparison. So employment locations for IU. Purdue had a similar map. The colors on IU's I think are a little bit nicer, but both of them are like a heat map type thing. What you'll notice on this, and we'll get a little bit into it in a minute, is that 10% of the grads stay in Indiana and a whopping 40% go to Chicago. So this is not similar to Purdue. And I will switch over to some data on how I got that and show you a little bit more details. All right, so if we look at the Purdue job locations, what I've done is I've just copied their heat map of the US onto this slide and then also given a bar chart. So hopefully you can see pretty quickly here that the largest percent of Purdue business grads in 2022 stayed in Indiana, and then a significant number of them went to Illinois. And then you see a pretty quick drop off in the locations where grads went. What I did is I just took states that had more than 1% of the graduates. So this is not every single state. But you can see there's a pretty good spread of where grads go, but most stay in Indiana, and second, they go to Illinois, and then they go to large populous states. But if we switch over to Indiana, we see something that's very different. So IU grads, the vast majority of them, again, a much larger percent than any other state, go to Illinois. They don't stay in Indiana. They don't go to Indianapolis, even though that's a large city. They go to Illinois. We can assume that's Chicago, but I won't make that leap quite yet. So a large number go to Illinois, and then the second state is New York. That's not even Indiana. Indiana comes in third, and then again it drops off to those larger states that are sort of nearby, but you would expect to have grads from there. So what I did here is I just took the top 5 or 6 from each location and put them next to each other. You can see this is, I think, the biggest difference between the two schools. So if you're looking at at going to either Purdue or Indiana because you're local and you want to stay local, then the likelihood that you're going to have opportunities in the form of companies coming to you and offering you internships and permanent jobs in Indiana, Purdue would be the place to go for that if you're just looking at that. On the other hand, if your dream is to move to Chicago or New York City or something like that and work for a large accounting firm, then Indiana is a more likely scenario that will result in you going to that place. What I think is interesting here is when you look at the top 5 or 6, and I did 5 or 6 because that's where the data dropped off to far fewer students going to those states. It's the same list with the exception of New York. New York didn't even make Purdue's top states, and it features pretty heavily in Indiana. So something to consider when you're looking at schools is what your future plans are. What are your aspirations after school? What kind of job you want to be in? As you're thinking through that, I highly recommend going back through this video and looking at those employers for each of the schools and seeing what interests you, what kind of career you are looking for, and what's going to get you there. So thank you for tuning in again. Please leave suggestions. This video was made based on a suggestion, like I said in the beginning. I appreciated that. And like, subscribe so that you can keep up to date on all these videos that come out. And hopefully we will spark some curiosity and some help as you're looking at what school to go to. Have a great day.